All right, welcome everyone to Why Doesn't Louisiana Have a Civil Rights Museum? Oh, claps. So I see a lot of new faces that I've never seen before in the room. I'm going to do a quick spiel on the organization that we're working with, and then we'll let this panel get rolling. So I'm the executive director of One Book, One New Orleans, which each year hosts the Words and Music Festival. One Book, One New Orleans is a nonprofit devoted to literacy and community. So we pick one book every year, and we encourage everyone in the city to read the same book at the same time, with the idea that we'll grow stronger as a city through a shared reading experience. But when we do that, we have to recognize that approximately 1 in 4 adults here in New Orleans struggles with literacy, either with accessing books or with the ability to read and comprehend what's in those books. So how do we reach folks that have these struggles? I develop a curriculum around the one book every year, and we get that book and its curriculum free of charge into adult education programs throughout the city. We also get the book into education programs in both adult and juvenile detention facilities. We get the book into the ears of the blind and print handicapped through a partnership with WRVH Reading Radio. And if your barrier is poverty, you love to read, but you just can't afford to go buy a book, we make sure that every branch of the New Orleans Public Library has at least 3 copies on hand. And then we have a series of free family-friendly events to bring everyone together. And that's our bag, more or less in a nutshell. That's where I would have stopped in 2020. But what do you do during a global pandemic? You accidentally expand your outreach threefold? Sure, that's what you do. So during the pandemic, I was told by one of my contacts in the juvenile detention facility that social distancing there meant lockdown. And so she said, "Can you just get me any book, Megan? Not the one book, but just any book, because they're devouring books." I can do that. So I pulled up the next week with 500. And after that, I got a call from DePaul Community Health Centers, and they said all of our patients rely on public libraries and public schools for their books. And those things are closed, so our patients have no more access to books. Can you get us books? We've given them over 6,000 since that started. So that's also our bag, but our main bag is still the one book that brings the city together. And this year, that book, I hope you all know, is I Feel to Believe by Jarvis DeBerry. So throughout the year, we've been doing programming around this book, and one of the most talked about essays is, why doesn't Louisiana have a civil rights museum? So to address that question tonight, we have Jarvis. Sitting next to Jarvis, we have Leona Tate. Does she need an introduction? I will just say thank you for your hospitality. This is her house, and she's letting us have an event here. I'm so grateful that you allowed the conversation to take place. Next to Ms. Tate, we have Edgar Chase III. Mr. Chase. Obviously a member of the Chase family that runs Dookie Chase. A lot of civil rights organizing was done in the upstairs room of that restaurant. He's here to tell us about that. And then here at the end, we have Ernest Jones, a lawyer with too many accolades to name, so I'm not going to try. But his work has been really instrumental in trying to get the museum here and founded, as it should have been in 1999, yes?
That's when it started.
All right, take it away, Jarvis.
Good evening, everybody. We really are grateful that all of you are out here on a rainy and what counts as very cold New Orleans evening. So I really want to thank all of you for your presence, your attendance, and for your concern about this particular topic. I'm grateful to be here, grateful to be on this panel, and I thought that we would go in this order first, that we would allow Ms. Tate to explain where exactly we are and what the significance of this building is, and the significance of her efforts here. Then I'm going to leapfrog over to Mr. Jones and ask him to talk and give us an update on where the preparations for a state-funded Louisiana Civil Rights Museum is now. Megan mentioned that Mr. Chase is a member of the Chase family. When his mother died, I wrote a column and said that she should be recognized as not just a culinary figure, but also as a civil rights hero in the city of New Orleans and in the state of Louisiana, and indeed nationally, given the work that she did. So I want Mr. Chase to talk about his family's role in the civil rights movement in this city, state, and country. But first, again, to echo what Megan said, we are honored at Ms. Leonta's hospitality to have us here tonight, and wanted to give you the first opportunity to just tell us where we are, the significance of the ground on which we are right now, and what your vision for this place is.
I want to say thank you to everybody that came out tonight, and you're welcome to come back anytime. My vision started with just really trying to get the building open up as a school again, because after Katrina, they were only bringing one school back to this area. And the one school was Martin Luther King, and they had a wait list of like 500 students, and that wasn't successful. You know, I was told that schools now are required to be on 3 acres of land, and this is not. This is only on 1.8, but it's 3 stories high, so I just couldn't get any satisfaction with that. So I knew that it needed to be something educational. The panel on the Orleans Parish School Board had no idea of the history that had happened here during that time when we first started. I had to go there and do a presentation and kind of like make them understand what really happened here. And I don't know, God was with me that day because it worked. It worked. They all were in agreement. They had not done an assessment in this area since Katrina. So this school became on the auction block. It was for sale or for auction, and that was about to kill me. I just couldn't let that happen.
And Ms. Tate, for the benefit of people who we may have online, and maybe even the benefit of people here, what did happen here? Because not everybody may know the answer to that.
Okay. And on November 14, 1960, it was myself, Dale Etienne, and Tessie Prevost. We were the first 3 6-year-old students to attend this all-white public school. And I can remember that day like it was yesterday. It was horrific. I wish I would have thought about putting a video out, but we didn't. But you could have seen what that day looked like, you know. And as a 6-year-old and having no clue what was going on, to me, it looked like Mardi Gras. It looked like the streets looked on Mardi Gras. You know, I didn't pick up on everybody being white. I didn't pick up on the anger. My only concern was I was going to school on Mardi Gras and everybody else got to watch the parade. But it took a while before I understood the truth. And that's really what happened. But once we got in the building and went up to the principal's office, we was asked to take a seat. There was a bench outside the principal's office. And we must have sat on that bench half the day before they even decided to place us in the classroom. But once we got placed, the white parents started pulling the students out. By 3 o'clock that day, they were all gone. And I left Chester Gale and myself in this entire building alone for a year and a half. That in classroom right there was our first grade classroom. And we were confined, not understanding the confinement and not really, we were comfortable because where we came from was overcrowded. You know, I remember being at my old school, which was Hardin Elementary, 10 or 11 blocks where I used to walk, being overcrowded and just children all over the place. I can remember crying every day because I just hated to be crowded like that. And but here, I know it was just the 3 of us, but we were comfortable. You know, we didn't. Once we got in there, we saw the crowds when we came in the morning, and we saw them in the evening. You know, things were different for us, and things had become to be different for us like a year before that. But our only concern was we couldn't play outside, and all of that was for security reasons. We couldn't walk out of that door without a U.S. Marshal there to receive us. They would pick us up every morning and they would bring us home every evening. And I thought that they would just bring us and pick us up, but we found out later on that they were in the building the entire day, but we didn't see them during the day. But it was different. The only place that we could go to in this area, and not without a marshal or a teacher, our teacher was very motherly. I mean, she was a very good first grade teacher. Would be from that classroom, straight across used to be the restroom. And that's as far as we go. This building, this room was like an auditorium. There used to be a stage on that side of the room. And we were never allowed to just roam in this room, even though we were alone. We were never allowed. We would go as far as that door sill to the other side, and that was all. Our play area, if you open that door, it was under those staircases, under that staircase. And that's as far as we would go until it was time to go home. Food and beverages, we brought it with us every day. We were never allowed to go to the cafeteria. But we had no clue what was really going on outside those doors. You know, it seems like once we got inside, we just tuned the crowd out. I don't even remember hearing them once we got in the building. We just tuned it out. And we got
So were there students in other parts of the building? Were there students on the higher floors?
Never, no. Not at all. Not at all. They all were gone. They all were gone. And I don't know, year and a half. Half of the second grade was the same way. After the Christmas holidays, we got 25 other students, and they were predominantly black. There was only 2 white that came back that year. And they decided that next year that McDonough 19 would be a black school. And NAACP wanted to keep us in a white school. So they transferred us to T.J. Sims that used to sit on the side of the St. Gall Bridge, but it's torn down now. And that's where we really faced integration. It was horrific. I don't wish those days on nobody's children. Nobody, I don't care what color you are, nobody's child. We were deathly afraid. We didn't have the marshals or the police protection anymore. We had to do it a lot at Sims. A lot. A lot. So when I was pulling for this building, they were asking me about Sims. I didn't want no part of Sims. I didn't care what they did with Sims, but they supposed to have saved a corner for me so that I could put it in the building. But I didn't want no part of it. It was just too much to even think about. But it took us a little while. It took us almost 12 years to get to this point. It was just a whole lot of waiting for the school board to even just deciding to let it go. And we I had it placed on the National Historic Registry, and just a lot of little steps just to get to that point. We even tried to put a memorial out in the neutral area where the historic marker is, but the railroads wouldn't let us because there's a train that passed there every now and then, and for safety reasons, they didn't want us to do that. So, and how often do that train pass? Maybe twice a year, but for safety reasons, we couldn't do that. So, you know, our efforts, you know, I tried every time the superintendent position changed, I tried putting a letter on that desk, but the communication just wasn't there. It just wasn't there. But finally, we got a chance to Brenda Square and I and Phoebe Ferguson went up to the school board, and we made that presentation, and it was accepted. You know, they were all voted on, and it was voted on for the National Historic Registry, and I finally met a couple of developers that said it can be done, because I had gone to so many people saying nobody's coming back to the lower ninth ward. I wish you'd have saw this building last night. We had 220 people in here last night, you know, so look at going. That's all I can say is look at going. And here we are, you know,
So you're not calling this a museum, you're calling it the TEP Center. So what is your vision for it? What is the mission as you see it?
It's an interpretive center. We can't say museum, and we were saying museum at first, but we're not archiving. We're not collecting anything. Everything will be on video or pictures or whatever, but we're not collecting anything. So we can't use the word museum. I learned a lot doing this. You know, it's criteria, but it's going to be an interpretive center I want it to be for education purposes. Basically, the civil rights movement, not just what we did here, but whatever happened in the New Orleans area, you know, just civil rights things in New Orleans. We've also partnered with People's Institute. They want to start that's their offices over there, and you can see their symbols. I mean, their workshops are over there, but all the offices are on this side. And start what they call a community, doing racism workshops from kindergarten to first grade. Just move your hand, that's all. And that sounds like it was a great idea for me. You know, they were looking for a place to go, and when I heard that, I called them right away. And we've been working on it ever since. And we also have a beloved community. They'll be moving in what used to be the cafeteria. It's the little building outside in the back. And I think our missions are all almost the same. You know, we're just trying to make things equal for everybody. You know, and you know, it's a lot of hard work into this, not hard work, hard work. You know, it was, you know, it just was a passion and love for me. You know, Tessa Gill and I was always so sentimental about this building, you know, so we used to laugh about it when I said, oh, if I ever get my hand on that building, I'm gonna name it after the three of us, you know, and we'd laugh about it. We never thought that was gonna happen. But now it's the Teddy Etienne and Prevost Center, so that's what tech is.
I wanted to pass it to Mr. Jones, who's on the advisory board of the Louisiana Civil Rights Museum. And Mr. Jones, where are we now? Former Senator, State Senator Diane Bourgeois pushed through a bill in 1999 where the state was to create a Louisiana Civil Rights Museum in the city of New Orleans. Where are we now?
Unfortunately, we're not much further than we were in 1999. Like Ms. Tate, the Louisiana Civil Rights Museum has been an idea, a dream, a vision, and a plan for those persons who have advocated for it for many, many years. As you mentioned, Jarvis, the genesis was a number of conversations between the sons of Aretha Castle Haley, Sundiata Ochami, and then State Senator Diana Bourgeois. And the state senator worked a miracle in 1999 to get the state legislature to pass legislation mandating that there be a Louisiana Civil Rights Museum in the city of New Orleans, and actually had a budgetary amount set aside for it that was in the order of $25 million. That legislation was good news and bad news, because it made the Louisiana Civil Rights Museum a part of the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, a function of state government, which governs all of the museums in Louisiana. And that department was given the task of funding, creating, and running the Louisiana Civil Rights Museum. The money that was budgeted, however, got tied up in the political processes of the Louisiana legislature. And back among my historical references is a reference during the years of Governor Huey Long, who said that no man's wife, property, or mule is safe when the Louisiana legislature sits. That was certainly true, because the $25 million that had been budgeted got nipped off bit by bit by the state legislators, down to the part where there was nothing there was never a part in Category 1, but it got nipped off bit by bit. And the Board of Advisors, of which I am now a member, did not get appointed until 1987.
I mean, okay, until when?
1987.
Okay.
The Board of Advisors was all of the members were to be appointed by various organizations and government officials in the legislature. But it didn't get happening until 1987, when then state senator who took Diana's place, Cheryl Gray.
So are you saying 2007? Because it was 1999 that it was authorized.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I said 1987. I didn't mean that.
Okay, that's what was confusing.
I guess I was a little confused myself on that one. But it took a long time. But Cheryl Gray got it started, and the Board of Advisors was appointed. But many of the 23 people who were on the board promptly got off after they found out that they weren't going to be able to come and cut ribbons and be in a video on the news when the museum was opened next year. So they kind of left, and we got down to about 12 people on the board of advisors who have kept it alive since then. Since you were kind enough to write your article about us, we have continued to struggle in various ways. We've gone through 3 secretaries of state since the time the legislation was passed: Mitch Landrieu, Jay Darden, and Billy Nungesser. And we are still struggling to find a home. We have gone through various plans and various iterations of places, but there always seems to be a reason, like the railroad train running, that stands in our way somehow. I think it's an example of policies that kind of assume that there should be a dominant place for other folks and a subordinate place for people of color. My answer to the question of why is there not a civil rights museum, a Louisiana Civil Rights Museum, is because the people that we have elected to distribute our public resources have no political will to have a Louisiana Civil Rights Museum, especially not in the way that we have, the Board of Advisors has envisioned the Civil Rights Museum to be.
And how do you envision it to be? What do you dream about?
Well, basically, the first premise is that we define civil rights well beyond the traditional 20th century civil rights movement itself. We define civil rights as being the struggle for human dignity against domination. And in the Louisiana story, that means a whole group of people, Native Americans, indigenous people, Africans, Italians, Sicilians, Acadians, and others. And also women who had to struggle for their dignity in the dominant trade people of Louisiana. So we define that civil rights broadly. And we can't stay in the 20th century. We have to go back to the beginning of the state's creation and through its 3 phases of different governing bodies, because each one of them had their own way of dominating those groups.
And you mean by the French, the Spanish, the Americans? Those are the 3?
The French, the Spanish, and finally the Americans. They all had a little bit of hand in it. And we believe that to tell the story of Louisiana history and the struggle for human dignity, you have to go all the way back to the beginning, even before the Louisiana Purchase, to do that. That in itself has been a struggle with the governmental powers that be concerning the civil rights movement and its content. Because we will not rest ourselves on the traditional civil rights museum kind of thing that tells this condensed triumph story of your history begins with slavery, then came Martin Luther King. Slavery was bad, Martin Luther King was good. Slavery's gone, Martin Luther King did good. Now, then came Obama and everything's all right. That's the story of triumph that a lot of museums are forced to tell. And we refuse to tell that story in Louisiana because it's not right. So those were some of the reasons why we have been up against a lot of resistance here in the last few years, especially. Right now, it looks as if we are closer than we have been. There is a move afoot, pushed by us, and Mr. Chase's son was in a meeting with us not too long ago. Bet you didn't even know that.
I don't keep up with him. He's into everything, so I'm smart enough not to try to follow him too much.
But we may have a temporary museum in the convention center. The convention center, and a target date for that, pushed by your son, is the Essence Festival of next year.
And that is delightful news to me, and I will back him all the time, and you too.
That's a place where we can have some sustainability. Many of you may have read stories in the newspapers about a civil rights museum being built somewhere near the convention center. We are still struggling with that part, and it may or may not happen, but a civil rights museum, at least in a temporary fashion, will be in the convention center by this time next year, if all goes well.
Good afternoon. I'm Edgar Dookie Chase IV's son. Father, he's my son. He goes by Duke, but I feel sometimes like I'm the son because I'm following him. Now, we all are here today, but many years ago, November the 14th, 1960, Leona Tate, Gail Etienne, and Tessie Prevost did a powerful thing of providing freedom and civil rights to people who lived in segregated societies in the Deep South. They endured the screams that said 2, 4, 6, 8, we don't want to integrate. And they suffered a lot of abuses so that we could have freedom today. That we can, Eddie's right, honor a person as the President of the United States, Barack Obama, because we would have never, even when Barack Obama was running for office, we would say unlikely people in Iowa would vote for Barack Obama because Iowa is largely a rural white community. But they did. So people change. Attitudes change. But those attitudinal changes had to start with someone who paid a heavy price. And that was these three women. This one right next to me, Leona. Now at our Chase Family Restaurant, we're putting down legacy walk pavers. Now, the first legacy walk pavers are going to be these people that, heroes, icons in civil rights, as Eddie mentioned, Martin Luther King, Thurgood Marshall, A.P. Turow, many others, Medgar Evers, and many others, all the freedom rider fighters, like Aretha Castle Haley, her daughters, Doris Haley, Reverend Avery C. Alexander, and many others. I'm not going to name them. But we also have legendary musicians, because civil rights has to be communicated, and often we find it's communicated through music. So we'll have the legends like Sarah Vaughan, and Fats Domino with his pink Cadillac, and James Brown. But I don't want to go too much into the celebrities of music, because we're here to honor the celebrities of this day that paid a price for us to be free, to have our schools integrated, to have us to be able to read books and not have a library that didn't hold books that black people could check out. Our Chase family has a foundation. We have sufficient amount of money that we can contribute to worthy causes, and we have to this One Book New Orleans with Megan Holt here. And we have done to, back to music, back to the St. Louis Cathedral, where Dr. Alfred Lemon with the Research Center of the Historic New Orleans Collection had done research to promote black composers in the Spanish and French era, where they were just gigantic composers that led the way to people like Louis Armstrong, because jazz is connected to classical, and we all know that. And we talked about people like Wardell Curzaire, who is known as the Black Beethoven. So what I'm trying to communicate is that our cultures are all Americans. Black people are as much a part of America as everything else and anybody else. And what we are so proud of is that we fight for democracy. We fight fascism and authoritarianism and people that will tell us we can't go here or we can't do this. We are all created equal, and we honor the Declaration of Independence. And we honor the federal law of the United States, that we are to be treated with dignity and respect under federal law. And we'll fight any state law that denies us the right to vote, the right to freedom of travel, the right to love who we want to love. So all those rights, this lady fought for us, and with those two other ladies. We have one painting that I really like in Dookie Chase's restaurant. It's by John T. Biggers, and it's called The Upper Room. And in the upper room of Dookie Chase's, we had all these people that I just mentioned to meet and strategize how we're going to overcome racism in our societies. And in that upper room, you'll see a picture, it's John Biggers' picture of women holding up the house. I call them the matriarchs of civil rights, the matriarchs of liberty and love. But there's no people in the house. There's two vacant chairs and a vacant bed. But we live in that house now. We live in freedom's home. We sit in those chairs. We sleep in those beds. We don't have to worry because people like her. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chase. I have some questions for you I want you to ask in a little bit. But first, I wanted to ask Mr. Jones, what do residents of Louisiana need to do? Whom do we need to lean on to make sure this isn't just a temporary civil rights museum? There's something that's permanent, because I know from talking to you in my past interviews with you, you all have had many ideas and dreams of locations. I know you at one point mentioned Aretha Castle Haley. I think another point was Armstrong Park, and I know another point was somewhere in the CBD. If we were going to first celebrate that we are going to get something temporary soon, I should say I had a conversation with the Lieutenant Governor 2 days ago, and he basically said there should be a ribbon cutting around Essence. So But what do we need to do? Which lawmakers do we need to call? To whom do we need to write letters to make sure that this is a real priority for the state lawmakers? Who is the Diana Bourgeois right now that people need to be leaning on and pushing to make something real and permanent happen?
He's gonna hate me for saying it. But the guy right now is Royce Duplessis.
Okay.
Who has really been a friend to us when he was a representative even. And he is responsible for us getting some little bit of funds to help us out so far. But he is right now the key to the legislative coffers, so to speak, because he was very prominent in the Legislative Black Caucus. He was not the chair, but he was very prominent. And he did a lot of work for us, and we're gonna lean on him for a lot more work. Let me say, just as a background thing, there are some people on the board who have encouraged us over the years and through the struggles to get away from the state of Louisiana and become independent, like Ms. Tate, or like the lady who started the museum that became the DeSable Museum in Chicago all by herself. There are others of us who have resisted that, and I confess that I am one of them. I have said that we deserve to have the public resources tell this story and not go out and try to raise all of the money ourselves. Our board is only volunteers. We have no staff, we have no office, we have no place to stand. But we should not be required through our organization like the Friends of the Louisiana Museum, a 501c3, to go out and seek funding and grants. Every other museum in Louisiana is paid for by public funds, the funds of the taxpayers, the folks who are in this room and their families. And so we deserve that as well. Legislatively, we need to strike the will within the hearts of the legislators. If we can't get their hearts to change, we need to at least change their behavior. We need the funding. We need them to do what the law says that they must. That they must fund, build, and operate a Louisiana Civil Rights Museum. And every legislator in the Black Caucus, and you know who your legislators are, and every legislator from New Orleans should be pushed upon to make this thing a reality. Our vision is a world-class museum that will draw people from all over the world because of the story that we're about to tell. It's not going to be that story of triumph. It's going to be the story of trouble. It's going to be the story of struggle, how we struggled, how we failed, and how we triumphed. And that's going to be true for all of the groups that I named, not just the Africans and African Americans as well, but the others that I named as well. The Native Americans, the Irish, the Italians, the Cajuns, all of those groups. And so it's going to be a story of triumph. And we know that we've got to tell it in a way so that the history is linked to the present. That is our task, that's the duty.
Given the mood in this country right now where people are, or I shouldn't say people, that there are white conservatives who are calling out the very idea of Black history and calling everything that's simply the teaching of history critical race theory. What are the prospects right now in our Louisiana legislature of a permanent civil rights museum being built? Because it seems like the waters have been poisoned, the well has been poisoned even more than it may have been poisoned before. Is that your assessment of it, or do you think differently?
No, I tend to agree with you on at least part of what you say. The well was always poisoned. It's always been that way. But it is getting worse. It has gotten worse. We're probably in the third reconstruction now. So things are going to get bad. But the lessons that have been learned in our earlier struggles will have to adopt the tactics at the same time. We're not going to tell some of the folks all of the things that we plan to do. That's number one. The Louisiana legislature would smack us down completely. They've already tried to change the composition of the body of advisors because they don't like the way that we think. They've already tried to do that. We beat back a bill in the legislature last year. There'll be another one next year, I'm sure.
To do what exactly? To change the board?
To strike every member who is on the board now and replace it with a whole set of 24 new people appointed by various members of government, the lieutenant governor, the mayor, etc., to get us all off the board and put new people on. So we will lose all of the history, all of the things that we have learned and the struggles that we have made to figure out how to do it and get around things and start the whole thing over. That was the bill that was in the legislature last year, but with the help of the Black Caucus, we defeated it. We expect another one next year as well.
I wanted to ask a couple of questions of Mr. Chase. What was it like growing up with the parents you had when you had them? I remember interviewing your mother, and I asked her if she was afraid of having these integrated dinner parties and people. She said she didn't have sense enough to be afraid. I think that's how she put it to me. But what was it like? Was the fear there for the children of the Chase family? Did you know how significant your parents' actions were in the civil rights movement? Did you get a chance to personally meet and talk to these larger-than-life figures who were coming through the restaurant? What was it like growing up at the feet of your parents when they were hosting the Kings and the Abernathys and the people from all over the country?
My parents do what many of your parents do. Your parents and my parents made me feel like a prince. So I felt that I could have everything. We had baseball teams. Many of these home run hitters are in this room now, but my mother and father would buy the uniforms, buy all the catcher's mitts, the baseball gloves, and everything like that, because they wanted their children to be honored and respected in the community, like your parents do. And they taught us that the way that's going to happen is through relationships, that you have to develop trusting relationships where the people know that you will stand by your word, that your deeds will be consistent with your word. And that's what brings about transformational change. That's what these three women did. Now, my mother wasn't much different from Tessie Prevost's grandmother, because she said to Tessie on that day when they came to integrate McDonald 19, I think it was, she said, "Child, don't worry. Just go to school and do what you need to do. Do what you need to do." My mother almost paraphrased word for word Tessie's grandmother. She said, "Son, you just go out there and get your education and do what you have to do to make this society better." So Jarvis, I've been admiring you for a long time. And they told me to find heroes in your local community that you can look up to. Those are the people that will take you there. So I don't know really if I answered your question, but I want to tell you that we learn through a culture of seeing people get things done. And if people don't do anything, we don't progress. We only progress when people pay a heavy price for us to progress. And some of these people that we're honoring here today paid such a price. I may have benefited because I was able to go to Jesuit High, instituted Jesuit High in 1963. But that was a few years after you did your work here. So although I might have had people to throw water on me or spit on me or things of that sort, or I might have had Jesuit Blue Jays clap when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and that shocked the heavens out of me. I suffered through all of that, but I'm sure what I suffered through was not anywhere near what they suffered through. But you remember things like that. They perform a cultural experience in your memory that you will never forget. So I think that's what we're going through now. We're trying to have this museum, and I think you have the right person, Royce Duplessis. And I also think that my son, Duke, is also right to support that museum in the business district near the convention center. I was on the dock board. I was on the Public Belt Railroad. I know transportation through the city of New Orleans. I know what happens at that port, you know, when Homer got on that train and how he was stopped. Transportation is one avenue of freedom. We have to have freedom of movement. But we have to put our civil rights in a place where people will know about us and not hide it. So it's got to be in a highly visible place. So I applaud what you're trying to do, and I hope you stay consistent, Eddie.
Ms. Tate, I wanted to ask you, I was really struck by something Mr. Jones said about people thinking of the civil rights movement as a whole as just a story of triumph. I thought about it sometimes, and it's often cast as a fairy tale. You know, oh, these little innocent girls went up against a big bad monster called racism and desegregation, and they won, and now it's all over. You mentioned TJ Sims? And I want you to just take a moment and help us recast what it was like to be a pioneer, what it was like for your family, what it was like for the other people in your neighborhood, what it was like when you went to the second school, and what it has been for you since then. How do you think these experiences that you had walking as a 6-year-old through these doors shaped or impacted the rest of your life?
My family and our lives were drastically changed. I can remember at 5 years old. I just started noticing, my mom had a lot of meetings to attend. My teacher doing other things that hadn't been done with me. Extra homework, of course, when everybody else was outside playing. And, all of this was to get us prepared. My dad's identity was held back a long time because of where he worked. He worked in an area where a lot of the protesters came from, so they didn't know who my dad was. But it just was a lot of changes, and I can remember starting to be confined. Everywhere, I wasn't able to go outside and play with my friends anymore. So I remember going to a building, and I remember being questioned by a white lady and a white man. We were psychologically tested to see if we could endure what we was about to go through. We were 5. We couldn't write, so they had to question us. And I don't know, I tell everybody, I must have talked my way through that one. I made it through, but I know I was well trained to answer a phone because I was 3 answering the phone and asking who's calling and taking messages. So I knew I could do that. But I just couldn't remember. I didn't know where I was, and I was at the school board. Later found out I was at the school board. But all of these things just started changing, and I knew something was about to happen. I had no idea. And my family really didn't talk around me because they didn't want me afraid. And I was never afraid. I could never say I was afraid. And, you know, children didn't get in grown folks' conversation back in those days anyway, you know, so that was the rule. But I can always remember my mother saying that she paid a lot of her taxes and she wanted me to go there, you know. But it was a luxury to me because I was getting a ride going 3 or 4 blocks while I was walking 10 or 11 blocks to my old school. So, you know, all of that was, as a 6-year-old, was fun. You know, I had no idea what was really going on. And she had so much of, you know, help, you know, family support. I had an uncle that was really the backbone of me getting to where I needed to go, and but he looked white, so he got away with a lot. And my mother was from St. Bernard Parish, and it's just a lot of stuff that was going on. We could go, this would be days, we could go through this. And I can remember my grandfather was still living at that time, and he was in Braithwaite, and a deputy recognized my mother on the TV. And he went to my grandfather and told him to tell my mother to take me out of that school. And my uncle told my grandfather to tell him, put 1 foot on this step. We never heard from him no more. So, but my mother was, I tell anybody, she was courageous. If I had an ounce of courage my mom had, I'd be dangerous, because she stood her ground. She didn't speak much, but when she did, you listened. And I tell a lot of children when I go to different schools that obedience played a big part of what we had to do, because we had to listen, because it could have been dangerous. It really could have if we didn't listen. And it was just, I don't know if children today that would work, because they have their own minds these days. You know, it's not the same as it used to be years ago. But my family, you know, their lives changed. You know, I can remember on the weekends I would leave my home in the 9th ward, and I would go stay with my aunt and uncle in the 7th ward, and the police would follow us in the 7th ward, and they would stay there till I come back to the 9th ward. You know, it was no. But if anybody was coming to visit me or play with me, we had to know in advance they were coming, and they had to come to me. I could never go to them. I could never go to them. You know, so it was a different kind of childhood. You know. But it was overwhelming for us. Tess and Gil would say the same thing. I didn't talk about this for years. I think I started talking about it more when I started being busy trying to get this building. I could go anywhere and I could hear in the midst of a conversation somebody talking about it, and I would never say it was me. I would never say. It was overwhelming, you know, and mainly not during school, after school, you know, people recognizing in the press. You know, it just got, you know, somebody would say, well, somebody's coming to talk to you, and I would just bust out and start crying, because it was just a lot. It was just a lot for a little girl. My summers, we went to New York. We visited my uncle's brother in New York. And he was very proud, you know, he was very boastful, you know, so, you know, of course, he wanted the whole world to know I was there and who was there. So that was a lot. It was a lot. But I don't know, my family endured a lot. My mom, you know, I know she went through a lot, because I found out later she was pregnant with twins, and she lost those babies during that time. So I know that because of the stress that probably took that from her. But she stood her ground. She stood her ground. And, you know, we just had to listen. We really had to listen. But the NAACP, the community churches, people in the neighborhood, she had all the support in the world. We had a surrogate mother, Miss Leontine Luke. I don't know if you remember her. You know, she was a surrogate, you know, she was like the liaison person for our parents with the NAACP, you know, and she was always there. She was always there. You know, it was a lot.
How do you tell your story to children other than this? What do children, when they come into this place, ask you? I'm curious, first graders or second graders, when they enter this space, what is it that you want them to know before they exit?
The truth. The truth about what happened. They need to know. But they enter this place the same way we enter. They come up the front stairs outside. They go up to the principal's office, and I have someone to tell them what that area was about. Then they'll come down to this space. In that room, we show a film, and it shows November 14, 1960. They show the crowd of people screaming and hollering in the street. They show us walking up the steps to get in the building. And it shows, a lot of the political figures talking. Civil Memorial, just everybody you can name probably had a little part in this video. And these children, you'd be surprised the way they come, and they're so attentive. But they don't see me until after the film is over, and I'll come through the classroom door and walk into the room. I've had a lot of children think that when I come in there, they're gonna see somebody in a wheelchair, or just old and feeble, like I've had them think we were way back in slavery, a little boy asked me, well, we thought y'all were dead, because they really think it's been that long ago. They don't think it's in their lifetime.
Especially with black and white.
Right, and they're amazed once they see that, and then they see them one of us and can touch you. That's what I want. That's what I want. That's what I want.
Mr. Jones.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a little point of personal privilege. I'm obviously older than Ms. Tate, and as she was describing those scenes, I recall in my own life being a high school student in North Louisiana. Didn't live in New Orleans. I was in North Louisiana, and I saw the news coverage of the incidents that you described. I saw the crowds, and as Mr. Chase has said, screaming, 2468, we don't want to integrate. And I remember seeing the hatred in that mob. I don't know if you were afraid as a child, but I was afraid as a high school black student in North Louisiana, because I'd never seen so much vitriol and hatred in my life. And I saw a woman, one of the mothers, whom I know now because I'm grown, was motivated by fear. But the thing that I saw in her face was hatred and terrorism, as she said, with tears coming out of her eyes, they in there. They in there. The niggas are in high school. I have never forgotten that scene, and I can't imagine what your parents must have felt when they saw those scenes. I said earlier in my comments that there were things that we weren't going to tell the legislature. I'm going to tell you one now. We're going to have a circle of courage in Louisiana Civil Rights Museum. And it's not just going to be the names of folks that you know, because the movement was really a movement of ordinary people doing ordinary things in an extraordinary fashion. Like the uncle you just described, who said, set one foot here. People like that. People like Ms. Chase giving po' boys to the house down there on Tontai when the Corps people had nothing to eat and they could send po' boys down there to them to work. Like the writers, Jarvis and the Louisiana Weekly, who would write the stories of what our people were going through during the time, and being the only repository where people could see the truth of what was happening. Those were the people who did the movement, the civil rights movement. They were regular, ordinary people, and that's who we want to be in our circle of courage. The mother of Gary Duncan, who told her 16-year-old son, no, don't plead guilty down there, because you didn't hit that white boy. You didn't hit him, and I'm not going to let you plead guilty and take the day in jail and go home.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna let you do that. And that ended up being Duncan versus Louisiana in the United States Supreme Court. Those are the real heroes. I asked Gary Duncan for a picture of his mama, and we got that picture to put in the Civil Rights Museum. Those will be the kinds of folks that we're talking about. People like Fluky, who nobody knows, but was a real hero to the freedom rides.
Yes.
A real motivator in the changes that were made. The circle of courage that we will have not just the names that folks know, but regular human beings who did the work that was necessary to change people's consciousness and make them able to take the risks that they had to take to make some change. So that will be in the museum if we can ever get it done, and we will.
I think we want to give other people a chance to ask questions if they have it. But I also want to ask, who here has been to any of the civil rights museums that are in the United States? Can you raise your hand if you've been to one? I know, Mr. Jones, that you've mentioned some models that you have other museums that you looked at. I know we talked about the B.B. King Museum in the Delta, and I think there's obviously the Smithsonian in D.C. Ms. Tate and I were just talking about that before we started. Ideally, if you could have any location you wanted, any type of architecture that you wanted, what museum would this be like? And maybe it would be completely unique, but what is the vision for it? Is it one level, two level? Is it a mixture of indoor, outdoor? Like, what is the vision for what it should look like? And I also asked that from Ms. Tate too. Actually, I'll start with Ms. Tate to ask what the vision for this place when it's completely finished will look like, and then go to Mr. Jones, and then take your questions.
Well, the Interpretive Center will only be on this floor. We have 25 affordable apartments upstairs for 55 or older. And I forgot to say that. And 16 are already occupied, but our Interpretive Center will only be here. And there's an area where the principal's office was that's glassed off that'll eventually be pictured. And we probably could go up there tonight. And that'll be the first part of the exhibit. But yeah, that's my vision.
Well, we haven't gotten down to a design phase yet, so I can't tell you whether it's going to be on one floor, two floors, or three. But what I can tell you is that of the museums that I have seen, and we have visited many in our study of what a museum needs to be like, the one that is closest to what we are trying to do in the vision is the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, which I had a chance, we visited, my wife and I, last year, and I was blown away by the way that they have gotten the idea of struggle over to the public in that museum. That one is a good one. And you can see some of it online if you go online to look for it. But some of the exhibits are simply startling. I've told you about the Circle of Courage. We will, of course, visit the slavery portion of our history and the special ways that New Orleans was a center of not the transatlantic slave trade, but the internal slave trade here within the United States. New Orleans was the center of that, and that will be a significant part of the story that we are going to tell, as well as the stories of the free persons of color who did so many things that has no parallel anywhere else in the United States. What people don't know, in fact, is that when Louisiana was proposed to be a state, there were people in the Congress who resisted because we had such a high volume of free persons of color that they didn't want that kind of stuff to infect the rest of the slave-holding states. And maybe we shouldn't make Louisiana a state after all, because we'll have trouble with it. But we've got a lot of stories to tell coming out of that, and it's going to be so unique, so different, because there is nothing in the country like Louisiana and Louisiana's history.
Questions?
Mr. Jones, you mentioned on November 14th, 1960, you were a teenager in North Louisiana.
Yes.
What was that like?
No, it wasn't bad at all. We didn't know anything. We didn't know anything different. We had been taught what our place was, and my mama, like every other mama of that time, pointed out to me the Emmett Till pictures that were published in Jet magazine, and told me as a teenager what I needed to do to stay alive. And I did it, because I wanted to stay alive. And I understood that if I didn't do what she said, that there was a good chance that I would be dead. And she did teach me that terrorism, like is being talked about now, talked about after 9/11, was nothing new. She said that black folks had always lived in a state of terror and been terrorized here in Louisiana. And that if I wanted to keep myself alive, I knew what I had to do, and that was behave. That had a special meaning for black teenagers in the 1950s and 60s. What we can do is try to change that.
I saw Miriam's hand.
Well, I guess I had two questions. One was, has there been have there been discussions with some of the people who might have been outside screaming? Do you know what happened to any of those people? Have you ever talked to any of those people? Have they reformed in any way? And I guess the other question was, of course, because I am also from Shreveport, is the story of the civil rights movement in North Louisiana also going to be included in this plan? So those two completely different questions.
Well, as far as us, we've reached out to try to get them to come in, because that's part of my vision is we need to talk. We need to have that dialogue. We need to know nobody's born with that kind of feeling. You know, you taught that somewhere, you know. And so I think if we could get to the root of the problem, we can eventually get it out of here, you know. But I think people are just kind of embarrassed. They don't want to talk about it. I've only had one gentleman to come to me, and he said at that time his brother would have been in my class, but his brother still have some of those kind of feelings. But the only thing that he can remember, his mother took him out of the school was because of the bomb threats. And that's all I can remember. But as far as anybody individually come back to talk about it, no, not at all, not at all. But there's one lady, my aunt had a scrapbook that she collected articles, and I still have that scrapbook. And there was a lady in the scrapbook that was one of the protesters, and she was standing on the hood of a car, and she was pregnant, and you could see the anger in her face. And I don't know why, every time I looked in that scrapbook, I was always drawn to that picture. So I was 19 years old, and I started working at the telephone company. I saw this lady, I kept saying, this lady looks familiar. And something brought me back to that book. And it was her. But she don't know till today that was me. She baked my baby birthday cake. She did, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was there any violence during this period? Just threats, or you said bomb threats?
Oh, I'm sure there
Did
was,
anything
but
happen?
I'm sure there was, but we didn't. As far as the children, we didn't know. Our parents may have known of things, but we didn't know of anything. I only can remember one incident. You know, we lived right on Claiborne and Delaware, and that was before Claiborne went all the way down to Chalmette. My house sat in the middle of Claiborne and Delaware, so we were highly secured. And you know, the neighborhood here was mixed. So the lady, my mother was sitting outside, and she passed, and she pitched a rock at my mom. But she didn't realize that our house was being guarded. They made her move out of the neighborhood that night. She had to go. She had to go. She had to go. And that's the only thing that I could remember.
So Mr. Jones, Marion's question was about the entirety of Louisiana's history, not just New Orleans or South Louisiana, correct?
No, not just South Louisiana. The answer to your question is absolutely yes. It's going to be a state museum having to do with the whole state and not just New Orleans. The people up in Shreveport, like Dr. Simpkins, Dr. Perkins, and whatnot, yes, absolutely. We talked to some of those folks. There are very many. If you're from Shreveport, I know that you know there are churches up there. Probably the last speech that Martin Luther King ever made, he made there in Shreveport, in one of the churches, and they heard a little bit of his "I Have a Dream" speech right there in that church. I've been told by one of the ministers who was up there during the time. So yes, there will be plenty of North Louisiana activity and other things on display in the museum as we can create it. Absolutely. And I'm not going to leave out the middle of Louisiana as well. Bogalusa and the Deacons for Defense, all of those things are a real part of the history. There's a lot of risk takers in North Louisiana, and that's what leaders in the movement were. They were people who took risks, and there were plenty of them in Shreveport. Because Shreveport, as you know, was the real Klan country in New Orleans. Better than New Orleans.
May I ask to be excused? I have my chauffeur, who is my wife, who is really my boss, and she's waiting out there. She will hang me from an oak tree unless I leave.
And we thank you for your participation, Mr. Chase. We're about to wrap up in a second. But we did want to ask if there was any more, maybe final question.
There's a question back.
Right here in the rear.
I was wondering, that's from Mr. Jones, you talk about all these stories and artifacts, their collection, and at the same time, you said you have no place where you kind of operate from. So I'm wondering if there is somewhere where all of these pieces of information and stories are being collected whilst the participants of the period are still with us. Is there some repository of...
No, if I'm understanding your question correctly, we are not now collecting artifacts. There are some that we already have stored in one of the places where the State Museum stores plenty of artifacts that they don't have on display, and that is in the French Quarter, where we have access to. But we have not ourselves begun any collecting effort. We've done some tapes and oral interviews, but we haven't really begun to put the content together that will be in the museum. There will be, in the next 6 months, some activity from our support group, the Friends of the Louisiana Civil Rights Museum, a 501c3 organization that's not connected with the state, that will begin to reach out to the public and have some places where the public can make some contacts about anything that they have that they think might be an important part of the story, but that has not yet begun.
you're dealing with the Historic New Orleans collection. They must have a treasure trove.
They have a plenty. And we do deal with them in the sense of learning from them, of what they know and what they have. As we get the story together that we want to tell, part of it may come from the Historic New Orleans collection, as we have seen some of the things that they have. But there are other places as well that we will tap upon. The library has some, the Louisiana Supreme Court has plenty. The land office here with the clerk of court has some things that we know that we need and we will reach out to. But it's not just the Historic New Orleans collection, although they've got a real treasure trove of material.
Let's see a question right here.
I was curious because you mentioned the organization Friends of the Louisiana Civil Rights Museum twice. I just want to know what role they're playing, because I know usually those entities mainly exist to raise, well, yeah, I can say that. They mainly exist to raise funds for the organization. I know you said you really want to make sure the state lives up to what they say they will live up to, but are there any plans for, or what is their purpose? Is fundraising like a part of their purpose?
Yes, it's a specific part of their purpose. We have never believed that the state was going to fund it totally and sustain it totally. And so early on, we created a 501c3 organization that is not a part of the state. It's a tax-exempt organization set up to raise funds to help us do what we need to do in the museum. And that organization is composed of members who are on the board of advisors of the State Museum, but not a part of the state. And the state has no control over that one. So its mission is to raise funds. And as I had suggested to this gentleman here, probably in the next 6 months, you will be hearing from them in some way, to become a member or to have some stories that you need to tell, etc. But that's what it is for. It's to raise funds.
Okay.
Is there a way to stay updated on the status of the museum, a Facebook page, or is there an e-list so that people can, like when you say that we'll hear from the friends, how do you keep the public engaged?
We have made no attempt to keep the public engaged yet because we didn't have anything going for us. So no, we don't have a Facebook page, we don't have a website, we don't have any staff, we don't have an office, we don't have a place. But we do have a will and a desire. And I know that you will be seeing all of those things within the next 6 months.
I hope so.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to end by explaining why this became a passion project of mine. Our church in New Orleans took a group of children to the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum in Jackson, Mississippi, which, if you have not seen it, is really, really well done. And I turn a corner in that museum and I am confronted with an image that's about floor to ceiling length of Jerome Smith and Doris Jean Castle stepping off a bus there in Jackson, Mississippi as part of the Freedom Rides. These are New Orleanians who are prominently figured in a civil rights museum that is not in New Orleans and that is not in Louisiana. And so, yes, I had known that New Orleans had this civil rights museum authorized in 1999 and that it did not yet exist. But to see that another civil rights museum was recognizing such important figures in New Orleans civil rights history just made me feel embarrassed to be in Louisiana and to know that there had been no such honor bestowed upon those people here. And so that is why this really, really mattered to me. And I think why it should matter to other people in this room and other people in this state. We have people walking among us like Miss Tate, and like Ruby Bridges, like so many others, like Jerome Smith, like Miss Doty, like Fluky, as he mentioned, who you can run into in the grocery store. And there have been people, there are researchers calling reporters saying, oh, can you put me in contact with Mr. Jerome Smith? Because I'm writing a book about Robert Kennedy, and I want to know what he said to the Attorney General in this meeting tonight. Oh, and can you introduce me? I mean, these are living heroes among us. And it is to our shame in Louisiana that we have not yet put up anything to honor, to respect, to archive, to memorialize all the bravery, all the courage, all of the discipline, all of the philosophy, all of the freedom fighting that these people did. And so I hope that you don't leave tonight and just, oh, that was a good event, but that you actually bring pressure to bear on the politicians and leaders of this state who can make these things happen. As I know it's a cliche, but you know, the squeaky wheel is the one that gets the oil, right? The people who make noise about a certain thing are the ones that get the attention of their lawmakers. So I want to just, again, thank all of you all for being here. Thank Mr. Jones, who I always have, like, I feel like I've sat through like a college level course, master's level course, whenever I am sitting down with him. Thank Ms. Tate for her hospitality. Please tell people about the center, that they're here, that they're open to tours, and the great things that they're doing. And let's get more and more, because the more people come here, the more you can say, look, legislators, look how many people are just going to the TEP Center, which isn't even a full museum, but people have a thirst and a hunger for the things that the Louisiana Civil Rights Museum can present. And I again thank One Book, One New Orleans and the Words and Music Festival. I thank you all for featuring my book this year. I will forever be honored for all of that. And I'm going to turn it back over to Megan. And thank you all so much.
I'm just gonna echo Jarvis's thanks that everyone came out on a cold, cold night to enjoy this event with us. I'm going to encourage you guys to take more food, please. Please take the food. And last but not least, I'm going to tell you to mark your calendars for December 8th at 6 o'clock. We will be having the last of our 2022 events inspired by Jarvis's book, and this one's really special. The adult learners that I mentioned who got his book and have been reading it, and they've been increasing their literacy skills by exploring Jarvis's work, have written pieces inspired by I Feel to Believe. Oh, Nikki's very excited. Sorry. And we've actually collected all of those, and they'll move you to tears. They're beautiful. They're going to be in a collection called Local News. We're launching it December 8th, and the adult learners will be reading. So please come out and cheer them on their literacy journey. Cheer them out as they debut their work in public for the first time. Thank you.